Today I'm with Ruth Duston. She's MD of Primera, which is a regeneration company. But one of her key focuses is looking after business improvement districts. And Ruth, you've got a whole lot of areas around London that you look after. Can you give me an idea of whereabouts they all are?
Yes, and hello, Peter, and thanks very much for giving me the opportunity to speak with you today. In terms of Primera and its role, it fundamentally specialises in the development of business improvement districts. So we work with a wide variety of businesses and business sectors across central London. So we predominantly operate in the City of London. So we work there on the Aldgate bid and the Cheapside bid. And we've got two emerging partnerships there, the Eastern City Cluster and Fleet Street. We work a lot in Camden. So we oversee a number of the Camden bids. We work with Hackney and Islington, and also in Westminster. So I work across the South Westminster area. So we've got 3, soon to be 4 business improvement districts operating there. So we have obviously the Northbank, which starts at the Royal Courts of Justice, just on the city boundary there, down through to Whitehall, which should become a business improvement district later this year, hopefully, and then into Victoria, Westminster, Parliament Square, right up to Victoria Station, and finishing at Buckingham Palace with the Victoria Business Improvement District. And South Westminster is probably the maturest bid that we obviously work with across the area. And Victoria bid has been established now for over 10 years. And whilst it probably makes up about 6% of Westminster City Council's area, so relatively a small footprint, it actually equates for 13% of Westminster's output. So I think we absolutely punch above our weight from a South Westminster perspective. There are thousands of businesses that operate across that footprint. We have 1,000 bid levy members who are engaged and involved with us. We generate probably just over £5 million a year for the South Westminster area, taking forward a whole range of different interventions which focus very much on public realm through to marketing and promotion of the area. So it's been a very successful bid, and one which represents a raft of different business sectors across the area.
So there's a lot of talk at the moment about how we transition from lockdown, and I presume that's the sort of thing that you'll be very much involved with, dealing with streets and how people get to work. Can you give me a picture of what sort of things you're planning at the moment?
Yes, so obviously I think, there is a big transitional phase that's going to come along. I think the recovery is absolutely going to be a phased approach. I think from our perspective, it's how we mobilise the London workforce. So I think the first question is, how do we get our workers back into the centre? So I think that's one of the key areas that we're working on at the moment. How do we manage the transport infrastructure to enable the right level of capacity on the trains and the tubes and the buses to get people back into the centre of London again? So I think that's a big area, a big question for all of us. I think it's looking at how we can be really flexible and agile, and really look at how we can adapt to the new way of working. Everyone talks about the new normal. I don't think we're quite sure what that new normal looks like. But I think what is absolutely certain is that social distancing is going to go on for an indefinite period of time. Mental health and well-being is going to be of paramount importance going forward, and as is safety and cleanliness of our business districts, of our office buildings, and all of the other services and the wider offer that we have across London. So I think there's an awful lot that we could be doing around that. I think it's very much about how we collaborate together and work in partnership. And I think the local authorities have quite a big role to play in that process. So I think it's looking at processes, it's looking at policy, and perhaps how we can be perhaps a little bit more agile in some of those areas of activity to help mobilise the workforce, but also to help kickstart the economy as well. I think the big thing for us is around the continued investment into the big districts. I think that the big thing is around this whole levelling up. And before COVID-19, there's been lots of ongoing discussions around London versus the other cities across the UK and this whole levelling up agenda. That was first mooted back in 2018 after the financial crisis. I think we're in a very different position now, and I think that it should be looked at through a very different lens, and perhaps thinking about the catalyst that London is to really start that UK economy moving again, and therefore what the continued level of investment should be, particularly around infrastructure and public realm.
So talking about public realm, that you also said that social or physical distancing is going to go on for quite some time. That's clearly going to have an impact on our streets. Lots of cities around the world are giving more space for pedestrians. London's a little bit slow on this. What's your view of how we create space where people can enjoy the space but also socially distance at the same time?
Yes, it's quite interesting because I've had lots of conversations this week, as you can imagine, about what those recovery plans look like, how we start getting people back into the centre. And it's no surprise that the word on the street is it's the offices that will be the last to come back. How you then balance that with a retail, leisure and hospitality sector who are absolutely on their knees at the moment and need those workers to come in to support their businesses is something that needs to be worked through. But I think the big question is, how can we do that in a safe way? And I think there is definitely scope for us to look at really pushing for more pedestrian space, more promotion of cycling, and also more promotion of walking around London as well. I'm sure you know, Peter, as well as myself, London is very easy to walk around. People tend to look at it from a tube map perspective. I think there's a lot more opportunity there to do that, and I think we have to create the right environment to encourage that. And I think employers also have to take into account factoring in the opportunity to enable employees to do that as well, because all too often we say, you know, it's too frenetic, I'm too time poor, I haven't got time to walk from A to B, it's much quicker to jump on the tube. I think we've now got to factor that time in, and I think with these video conference calls that we're all having now, I think that's kind of forced our hand in a way to perhaps work in a more efficient and operate in a more efficient way. So there is the opportunity there to promote that. And I think that comes back to my previous point about looking at processes and policies. And I think this is where the local authorities come in. This is absolutely where the GLA and TfL come into play, because we've all got to work on this collaboratively together. We're all saying we've got to be agile. We're all saying we've got to be creative. Businesses are being incredibly agile, incredibly creative in trying to continue to operate. And I think local government and the GLA have to support us in that quest. And in order to do that, that is absolutely looking at the public realm and how that can operate in a safe way that does absolutely encourage that social distancing. I think transport hubs are a really key area for us. So we might get the trains right, we might get the tube right in terms of the level of capacity. You've then got that bottleneck when they then come into the stations, into those key destinations. How's that going to be managed? And how's that going to be operated? And that inflow and outflow from those transport hubs has all got to be worked through. So I think there's an enormous opportunity for more pedestrian space to be given over to obviously Londoners, be those that live there, work there or visit. I think in addition to that, there was I think a report undertaken by the GLA back in 2017, and it was looking at green spaces and parks. And it was obviously demonstrating in there, for every £1 invested by either a local authority or a private partner such as a bid, they were able to quantify the value of that in monetary terms, with a £27 value for every £1 that had been spent, but more fundamentally, a £950 million saving on people accessing the health sector in terms of the alignment and the link that it has to mental health and physical well-being. So there absolutely is a fundamental need for government to continue to invest in not just placemaking, but public infrastructure in central London too. We in Victoria, prior to the lockdown, we started to look at Victoria Station. As you know, it sits in the heart of Victoria. Victoria has undergone a huge transformation in the last decade. The station isn't fit for purpose anymore. For anybody that's come through Victoria will know far too well. I think this provides an opportunity for us to continue with that piece of work, but taking into account the lessons that we're learning from COVID-19 and this whole pandemic, and looking at how we can recreate something that's much better and more fit for purpose. And I think the last thing I'd like to say around public space and public realm is, I think this whole pandemic has really crept up and swept everybody off its feet on a global scale. And when you think about the people that have lost their lives as a result of it, I think, wouldn't it be a fantastic legacy to those who have lost their lives that we can work and operate in a different way? And let's not go back to the old ways that we had before. The air quality, is it the best it's ever been? We've got wildlife coming into it. So we've got pelicans walking down Birdcage Walk at the moment. I mean, it's just so amazing. And I just think there is an enormous opportunity for us all to work together to put that right.
Absolutely, couldn't agree more. But also, one of the other things we've done is not only have we got used to using digital media like we're doing now, but also we've all started ordering even more things online, adding to the impact on high streets and the destruction really of a lot of the amenities that we expect in local shopping areas, and the hospitality businesses are going to be really impacted by COVID-19. How do you see the future of the high street coming out of this? Because obviously retailers are a key part of your clientele, aren't they?
They are, and particularly for those business improvement districts that operate in the Greater London area and outside of the city centre. There are a large number of high street business improvement districts. And I mean, sadly, what I do see and what I do feel is that what COVID-19 has done is accelerate the demise of a lot of those businesses that probably wouldn't have been with us in the next 12 to 18 months anyway. So I think it has very much accelerated that process. And what that does do is it very much clears the decks. However, it does also create lots of empty units. We've also seen an awful lot of job losses as a result of it. But what that does also bring to the table is an enormous opportunity to look more creatively and more innovatively at how those high streets can look going forward, and to give more opportunity to entrepreneurs to come through, and obviously take forward ideas and be more innovative in terms of how we create a more unique and different offer to encourage people to use the high street. What we haven't touched on too much is around the whole issue of home working. And as we know, and I mentioned earlier on, that it's probably the office workers that will be the last to come back. And they won't all be coming back at once. And I don't think we'll ever see the level of office commuters that we saw prior to this pandemic. Lots of people are saying that to start with, it will be a third of the office workforce that will start to come back. So there's a lot of people working at home. There's a lot of people that live in the home counties and in the Greater London area that have business improvement districts in their high streets. So I think there's an enormous opportunity to capture that particular cohort of individual. So I do think that there's an opportunity to see a real resurgence of the high street coming back. But the high street's got to get the look and the feel right, and it's got to make sure that it's got an offer that is appealing to everybody. But it also is about, I think, shopping local and supporting your local high street. So I think there's a whole communication piece that needs to be drafted and pulled together. But I think there is a lot of opportunity for the high street, but it is going to go through a challenging time, I think, for the next 12 to 18 months. But what could come out of the other side could be something quite compelling, and really, I think, provide a resurgence of the high street for us, definitely. I do think it's all about collaborating, and it's all about working in partnership in order to do that. And it's looking at the role that business improvement districts can play in that process. I think BIDs very much are the custodians of their area, and so I think we're well placed to work with our local authorities and our wider business community in reshaping and perhaps resetting the whole agenda on the high streets, on the retail, leisure and hospitality sector going forward. I do think in the short term, there's a big issue for retail, leisure and hospitality. And I think that's where the government steps in. We've seen a lot of government measures that have been put into place and very much welcomed by the business community. But I do think that there is an opportunity for government to perhaps reconsider those offers, particularly around the furloughing of staff. We know that 7 out of 10 businesses have had to furlough their staff. And if we look at sectors like the theatre sector and their supply chains, who have been absolutely devastated by this situation, I think the tapering or a more flexible furloughing scheme is absolutely what's needed for these particular sectors. When we do start to open up, it's very hard for them to open up with only 60% capacity in their theatre to even start to break even. So is it a case of them not being able to open at all? So I think the furloughing is of paramount importance. And I think BIDs are doing an awful lot of work in terms of lobbying around the tapering of that and the furloughing of that going forward.
But just one last point in terms of getting prepared for this. You mentioned that maybe a third of office workers will be able to go back. Do you think we should have greater clarity from government a little bit earlier as to what is likely to happen? Because businesses and organisations like yourselves will have to prepare and get ready for that sort of change.
I do, yeah, and I think everyone has been so stuck in crisis management. But what we need to start doing is looking at the recovery, the longer term recovery, and how we start to come out of this. And it's got to be done now. And I absolutely think it's got to be done by central government, by regional government, and by local government. We need to start that modelling now. So what are our districts going to look like? How are we going to mobilise the workforce to get them back into London? We as the business community are obviously second guessing a lot of this, but we need to be able to work with our public service providers to put that recovery plan into place to ensure that when those lockdown restrictions do begin to ease, that we're ready and able and agile enough to respond to what those lockdown measures are going to look like. So yes, we would absolutely like to hear from all of those public sector providers in terms of how we kind of get ready to get back to work, definitely.
Very good. Well, we look forward to everyone doing that and getting out of lockdown, and we'll watch what you're doing with interest to help your local communities get back and do it safely, but hopefully successfully. So Ruth Duston, thank you very much for your comments.
Thank you, Peter. Thanks very much.